911, what's your emergency?
I think our parents just got murdered. Please help.
Good morning, Wichita. Yesterday, our city was shaken by a tragic discovery. The Otero family was found slain in their home. 4 lives were tragically lost, and the perpetrator was still at large. Authorities are actively investigating, urging witnesses to step forward. I'm XXX, reporting live for XYZ News, bringing you latest updates on this developing investigation.
The bottom line, BTK is arrested.
Joseph Otero, his wife Julie, and their 5 children had just moved into this house at 800 North Edgemore Street months before. Sadly, the Oteros did not realize that their new house would become the scene of their demise, marking them the first victims in a series of heinous crimes that would grip the city of Wichita. Discovered by Charlie Otero were the bodies of his beloved parents, Joseph and Julie. Charlie, Carmen, and Danny were at school during the time of the murders, sparing their lives. Tragically, their siblings Joey Jr. and Josephine were not as fortunate. Joseph and Julie Otero were found suffocated with plastic bags that were tightened by cords. Both their hands and their feet were tied up. Later found by the police was Joey Jr., 9 years old, on the floor, bound in the same fashion. And Josephine, 11 years old, was stripped and hung on a water pipe in the basement. A disturbing event the killer would later horrifyingly reenact on a doll. Unfortunately, the people of Wichita would find themselves on edge for the next 3 decades. Catherine Bright, 21 years old, stabbed 3 times in the back and lower abdomen with a knife. Shirley Vian, 26, strangled with rope and suffocated with a plastic bag. Nancy Fox, 25, tied up and strangled repeatedly with a belt. Maureen Hedge, 53, strangled with the killer's own hands. Vicky Wegerly, 28, tied up, strangled to the point of fatal injury with a nylon stocking, and left for dead. Dolores Davis, 62, strangled with her own pantyhose.
Those 3 dudes you have in custody and us talking to get publicity for the Otero murders. They know nothing at all. I did it by myself and with no one's help. There has been no talk either. Let's put this straight. I'm sorry this happened to the society, but it's hard to control myself. You probably call me psychotic, perversion hang-up. Where this monster entered my brain, I will never know. But it is here to stay. How does one cure himself? If you ask for help that you have killed for people, they will laugh or hit the panic button and call the cops. I can't stop it, so the monster goes on and hurt me as well as society. Maybe you can stop him. I can't. Good luck hunting. P.S. Since asterisk criminals do not change their MO or by nature cannot do so, I will not change mine. The code word for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them, BTK. You see, he's at it again.
In 2005, Rader was finally caught after a floppy disk he had sent to a Kansas TV station was traced to a computer at his church. Before they could arrest Rader, however, police needed to match DNA evidence to the scenes of the murders. Investigators obtained a warrant to test the DNA of a close relative, Rader's daughter.
They found out I had annual pap smears and they got a warrant for my medical records. It would have been nice if somebody had asked me for my DNA. I would have willingly given it.
We're working out this fantasy online, and once that person become a fantasy, I could just loop it over. I'd lay in bed at night thinking about this person, the events and how it's going to happen, and it become a real, almost like a picture show.
Dr. John Paul Garrison, who's a clinical and forensic psychologist, explains that analyzing pictures provides an in-depth look into an individual's priorities and anything that they hold on to as important. This is what Dr. John had to say about the pictures Rader drew.
In this picture, they believe that this is likely Cynthia Kinney, and if you look on her blouse, there appears to be what could be seen as the letter C. Now, it could also just be a scribbled detail. He may not care enough about the identity of his victims to even want to include something like that. There's also obvious sexualization in the picture. Obviously, he had somewhat disrobed this person in this picture, and he is highlighting that. And he was able to get aroused by pictures of himself because the person didn't matter. It was all of the clothes and the binding and the control. So now as we look at this picture, he does tend to draw some self-portraits in there when he's drawing these folks. As you can see here, it looks like they've done probably an AI rendering of the face based on the drawing. Obviously, this one's a bit more sexualized directly than the other ones.
But then the question arises, what could have possibly caused this sort of behavior? When asked about his childhood, Rader mentioned about a certain humiliation from his mother, stating that it lingered through his mind.
Felt he probably deserved more than what he was getting in life. He was angry about his childhood. He had a lot of unresolved conflicts, and so he turned to the dark side, and he never came back once he started it.
The BTK killer breaks most stereotypes about serial killers. He was a family man with a respectable job and lived what seemed to be a normal life. Like any serial killer, there is not one but many motivations behind the BTK's murders. Forensic psychology professor Catherine Ramsland, who spent a lot of time interviewing the BTK killer, had this to say about him.
Rader came up with a much more interesting idea, and he called it cubing. And it's the idea that there's a cube with multiple faces, and any given face that might be toward you, maybe he's the church president or the good father or the good husband, but he could switch that face of the cube over and become a thief, a liar, a serial killer. And all of that is packaged up in him, and he can pull it up whenever he needs to in a given situation. So people are so curious about how he could live with these polarized contradictions. I think would shock a lot of people that any person can actually live with those kinds of moral contradictions and just move about their lives, go to classes and college, go to work, play with their kids, go on hikes, go on vacations to Disneyland, and still be a serial killer. I think that shocks a lot of people. And Rader does really explain it very well with that concept.
Brought the community, my family, the victims, dishonor. And it's all self-centered, as I would call a sexual predator. Today is my final judgment. For me, the last couple of days in court, presented by the state, their PowerPoint presentation was very powerful. A couple of things I might point out toward the last, but overall, most of that was true. And I think Sedgwick County ought to be proud that they do have a good state, that the evidence was there earlier, DNA, floppy. There was no way that I was going to get out of this. With remorse, responsibility, and corrections are the concepts of apology.
Even from the short clip alone, we can sense the lack of remorse he has for his actions. There was no way I was going to get out of this, he says, even as he apologized for what he called his atrocious and very selfish acts. Rader showed flashes of the arrogant killer who delighted in taunting police with clues.
I would ask that you stand, Mr. Rader. It will be the judgment, order, and sentence of the court that you, Dennis L. Rader, be taken by the Sheriff of Sedgwick County, Kansas, and by him delivered to the custody of the Secretary of Corrections to serve a term of life for the premeditated murder of Joseph Otero, murder of Julie Otero, of Josephine Otero, Joseph Otero Jr., of Catherine Bright, of Shirley Vian, Nancy Fox, of Maureen Hedge, of Vicki Wagerly, Dolores Davis.
As we prepare to watch the victim impact statement by Jeff Davis, son of Dolores Davis, let us remember that behind every crime there are real people whose lives have been profoundly affected. Let us now listen attentively to the voice of Jeff Davis, honoring his courage in sharing his story.
If I were to sink to your level, I would say that this world would have been much better off had your mother aborted your demon soul before you were unleashed on this world, sparing 10 innocent lives and avoiding untold heartache for this community.